Hello and welcome to another edition of Ideological. I'm your host, Zach Lee, and today we're talking about the sexiest of topics, ethics and morality. Should you push an old lady down the stairs? Should you murder somebody? No, we're going to be dealing with more difficult questions than that. But we're going to talk about ethics. Ethics is a major component not only of philosophy, but also politics and culture. A lot of the areas where we disagree when it comes to the areas of thought have to do with ethical issues. And so we're going to be talking about ethics today. It's cloudy, by the way. If I look dark, it's not because I'm having a bad day. It's cloudy today. So this light is blinding my eyes. Ethics. Here's what I want to do. I want to walk you through 4 potential ethical scenarios, and then we're going to learn how different ethical systems would answer those different scenarios on what they think that you should do. Here's the first one. This one's pretty common. It's 1943. You live in Nazi Germany, but you're not a Nazi because the Nazis are the worst. And you're hiding Jews in your basement, and somebody knocks on the door, and it's an SS officer, and he asks if you're hiding, as he would say, the enemies of the state or something like that, like a good German movie. The question is not, do you hand over the Jews? You don't hand over the Jews. The question is, have you acted unethically by lying? That's the question. The question is not, what would you do? I think most people would probably not hand over the Jews. The question is, most of us would probably just lie. That's not the question, though. The question is, have you done something immoral when you tell that lie? Is that really a lie in that particular circumstance? Have you done something unethical? So that's the first scenario. The second scenario is the one from the book and movie Lone Survivor. So if you haven't read the book or seen the movie, this group of Navy SEALs goes in to kill this terrorist in this town, and this terrorist is going to kill a ton of people if they let him get away. But as they're making their way towards this town to kill this terrorist, which will save a bunch of lives, they stumble across a little shepherd boy. And they have to wrestle with the ethical dilemma of, do we kill this kid? If we kill the kid, we succeed in the mission and we save more overall lives, but surely we can't just murder this innocent shepherd boy. Yeah, he could be a soldier later, but right now he's just a kid tending sheep. And so what do we do? Okay. And again, the question is not, are there other options? You could leave a SEAL there to guard him and go complete your mission. You could bring him with you. You could, do all kinds of other scenarios. But that's not the issue. The issue is, if your only options are to kill him or let him go, and he's going to let the terrorists know that you're there and it's going to ruin the mission and more people will die, what is the ethical thing to do and why? The third scenario is weird. Let's say that some sadistic killer, some weirdo, some guy that's got too many online profiles, has 50 people locked up in his basement because he's a weirdo. And he captures you and he says, if you will murder this one woman with your bare hands, I will let all 50 go. But you have to murder this one woman. If you don't, I will kill you, I will kill her, and I will kill all 50. What is the ethical thing to do there? Okay, again, this is not what would you actually do. I would use all my sick James Bond skills and kill the guy and save everybody. That's not an interesting question. The interesting question is, should you kill the one to save 50? Or should you let him kill the 50 and you're not culpable, but you could stop it? So what do you do? Then there's the fourth scenario, the dropping of the atomic bombs at the end of World War II on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the ethics of that. By doing so, you end the war, you stop a mainland invasion of Japan, which could cost many more American lives, but you know it comes at the cost of nuking civilians. These are not easy questions. So those are what we're going to look at throughout this lecture, but first we need to talk about some different ethical systems, and then we will talk about how they would answer these different questions. Before I get in, there's 3 main ethical systems in the history of Western philosophy. There's a lot of ethical systems, but 3 biggies. Before I get into those, though, I want to talk about 2 systems, either of which could be right, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these because I think that they're both a little bit lazy. I think that they don't do the hard work that they need to do. So the first is just a system of ethics that would say there is no such thing as ethics. We can say that we don't like certain things, but there is no such thing as right or wrong. Things just happen. There's different variations of this view. There's subjectivism, which is just ethics or one's opinion. There's relativism, which sort of that contradictory views can be true at the same time, which makes no sense. But essentially, it is the idea that there is not a standard of ethics that we can come to know which decisions are moral and which ones are not. And again, that very well may be true. It could be the case that just people assault children, and that's just a fact, and we cannot ascribe a value to that. We cannot say it's bad or that it's wrong. It could be the case that 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, and that's something that happened that we don't like. But if you ask somebody why you don't like it, typically they'll say because it's bad or that it's wrong. So that's a view that could be right. In my view, though, it's a little bit lazy because there's something intrinsic to us that doesn't just want to say the Holocaust happened. We want to say it was wrong. There's something where we don't want to just say when a child is assaulted or somebody molests them or puts out a cigarette on them, where we don't just say some facts happened in nature. We say that shouldn't be that way. And when you say should and shouldn't, ought, you're talking about ethics. There's what is, that's just the thing that happens, and then there's the value that's ascribed to it, what's called ought. This is also called Hume's guillotine, by the way, the is-ought distinction. So that's one view. I'm not going to spend a ton of time because that lecture would be pretty short. Yeah, if there's no ethics, no morality, nothing has a value judgment, good or bad, things just happen. The other view is, again, very popular and might be right. Not saying either of these are necessarily wrong. I just think that they don't answer the questions I think we need them to answer. The second one is called divine command theory. This is the idea that what makes something right or wrong is that God or the gods, depending on your religion, say that it's right or wrong. So what would make murder, in this case, wrong is if God has said not to murder. Now, I'm going to use the Bible as some examples here just because that's probably the context that many Westerners in America are in, but this would apply equally to the Talmud, this would apply to the Tanakh, this would apply to the Vedas, this would apply to the Quran. The idea, though, is that what makes something right or wrong is that God has said it's right or wrong. Now, again, to be clear, that doesn't necessarily mean that view is wrong. If God exists and he has revealed himself, then that would not be a bad answer. That would actually be a pretty smart answer. The reason I say that it's lazy is you're going to have to deal with some other issues, even if divine command theory were right. Let me give you a few examples. The first is called the Euthyphro dilemma. Does God say that something's good and that makes it good? Or does he see that it's already good and therefore declares it to be good? So if you say, Zach, murder is bad because God said murder is bad, the question that people will then ask is, okay, why did he say murder was bad? Did he just decide that it would be bad? Is it just, it makes him sound almost a bit arbitrary. Could we really say that if God wanted us to rape each other, he could command us to rape each other and that act in and of itself would now become good just because God said that? Conversely, though, you don't want to say that God sees that something's already good and just says it's good. Like he looks and says, well, murder's bad, so I'm going to say that's bad, or rape is bad, so I'm going to say that's bad, because then it almost seems to put some sort of moral standard above God. So divine command theory could be true, but it just pushes the question back further of, does God think something's good because he simply declares it to be good? It's part of his will. He decides it. Or does his intellect see that it's already good and that's why he calls it good? But to say it another way, are all of God's commands just arbitrary? Everything he said is good just because he said it, and just because it's bad just because he said it was bad? Now, again, arbitrary, we're talking about arbitrary from our perspective. Technically, if God exists, then he might have a reason for something that he hasn't told us, and it wouldn't technically be arbitrary. But anyway, that is an issue that you have to deal with. Religious people have come down on both sides of that, but that's a problem with divine command theory. What about when two things are commanded? This is why you still have to have philosophy, okay? The Bible is going to command you not to lie, but there are times in the Bible where people lie and it seems like it's okay. There's the Hebrew midwives with Pharaoh who's killing all the babies, and they lie to Pharaoh so they can save the Hebrew babies. There's a chick named Rahab in the Old Testament, and she lies to protect the Hebrew spies, and she's commended for it. What do you do if you're supposed to obey your father and mother and they ask you to do opposite things and neither of which is technically sin? They're just two commands and you're going to disobey one by obeying the other. So what do you do when God has given several commands that, at least in certain circumstances, seem to butt up against each other? So you're still going to have to do philosophy, regardless of your view on divine command theory. We also have the problem of how do we interpret God's commands? So let's pretend that God exists. He may or may not, but for the scenario, let's say exists. And also let's pretend that he's revealed himself in some sacred book of religion. How are we to interpret that book? Like if you have a divine book, but different people interpret it a bunch of different ways, how can we get to what God has said? It almost seems like, again, you're going to have to do philosophy. It's called hermeneutics. It's the science of interpretation. Hermeneuo or hermeneuein is to lead out in Greek. That's where that term comes from. And so you're still going to have to do a science of interpretation. You're still going to have to bring your philosophy to whatever sacred text you're studying to figure out what it is about. Another issue with divine command theory is you start with that religious presupposition. You don't get there from some revealed text. Let me say it another way. If you decide to start reading the Bible, you didn't read that in the Bible and then come to that conclusion. You started there. Let's imagine you're just some guy on an island and you're trying to figure out what religion's right. And you're like, I think Christianity or something's right, so I'm going to just start reading the Bible. You then didn't learn that the Bible is God's word from the Bible itself. You started with that presupposition. And you would start with the same presupposition if you were born in a Muslim country with the Quran. Why are you going to the Quran instead of the Vedas? Why are you going to the Bible instead of something else? You're not going to the book saying, what has God said so I can learn about it? You're assuming that he's already said something in that particular book, which is why you started there. So it becomes a bit of a circular argument. It becomes a bit of a presupposition in where you start with divine command theory. And then lastly, you're still going to need an ethical system in which to put it. All I'm trying to say is, again, there might be no such thing as ethics. Divine command theory might be real. If God is real and he has given his word to us, then that is true. You're still going to have to do the hard work of philosophy. Why, Zach? Well, I'll give you an example. If God has said not to murder, what counts exactly as murder? What about certain types of in vitro fertilization where, let's say, you fertilize 10 eggs, but you only implant 2? Is that murder? Notice that you're going to have to do some philosophy to figure that out. Or the Bible will forbid lying or giving a false testimony. What if you're a spy in war? What if you're an undercover cop? Is it wrong to tell your kids Santa exists if, spoiler alert, he doesn't? Sorry for any ardent Santa worshipers. Anyway, so what do? You're still going to have to do philosophy. That's my point. My point is not that these things are necessarily wrong. It's harder than that. It's more difficult than that. So with that in mind, what are these major ethical systems that we want to look at today? Well, let me explain why I say there's 3. There's more, but the 3 big ones. What philosophers are trying to do is they're trying to come up with a theory of ethics that is logically consistent, that everyone can reason to, that doesn't depend on religion or divine revelation. Let me say that again. What philosophers are trying to do is they're trying to come up with a system of ethics that everyone can assent to, that's logical, that's consistent, that has certain reasons why we can say something is good or bad, that are objective, that are not subjective, without appealing to revealed religion. Again, these could all be wrong. But that's what they're trying to do. That's why I say these are the big systems. Because what they're saying is if you're an ardent Muslim, you believe that what Allah has said in the Quran is good. But if you're not a Muslim, that's not going to be a very persuasive argument to you. So is there a way to ground ethics in some type of reason, some type of logical system that everyone could agree with, or with which they could agree? You don't want to end a sentence on a preposition, which I actually do all the time. Language changes, it evolves, it's fine. We can end sentences with prepositions. That's what's up. That's where it's at. Is there a system that everyone could agree with regardless of their religious views? So that it's not esoteric. It's not for some small group. It's for everyone. That's what they're trying to do. Most of these systems are going to come down to this question. Should we take into account the consequences of the action or just the action itself? Should we take into account the consequences of what we're about to do? Or is an action right or wrong in and of itself? Damn the consequences. That's really the question. So we're going to go through a few systems. The first, deontological ethics. Deon is the word for duty. And this is most often associated with Immanuel Kant. There are other people that held that actions were right or wrong in and of themselves, duty-based. But Kant's going to try to give it a logical foundation that doesn't appeal to other things. But this is an idea that an act is right or wrong depending upon logical, obligatory, that's the word, universal rules to which all people are bound by duty. Let me say that again. An act is right or wrong depending upon logical, obligatory, universal rules to which all people are bound by duty. Kant's system believes that an act is right or wrong inherently, regardless of the consequences, for everyone. The correct reason to do it must be out of duty, must be because it is the right thing for you to morally do, and you must treat people as ends, not just means, okay? He is famous for what is called the categorical imperative. He actually gives several different definitions of it. I'll give you one, but there's several. Act so that the maxim may be capable of becoming a universal law for all rational beings. Okay, so let's just back up for a second. Here's what Kant's trying to do. Kant never could. Here's what Kant's trying to do. Kant is trying to create a logical system where we can have this maxim, okay? We can have this categorical imperative, this overarching rule, and we will test every ethical action by that rule, and we will know logically whether or not it is ethical or not ethical. This is big ticket philosophy. If you can come up with a system to show logically that some actions are inherently moral and some are inherently immoral, regardless of consequence, based upon some unbreaking rule, you will have solved a lot of ethical issues. Okay, so act so that the maximum may be capable of becoming universal law for all rational beings. What is that? What is he saying? He's saying when you're asking if some action is right or wrong, you have to ask yourself, what if everybody did this? What if this was a universal law for all rational beings? And then you have to decide whether or not you're being logical or you're contradicting yourself. Ugh, okay, bear with me. He's not saying this. He's not saying if you're wondering if something is right or wrong, ask yourself, would you like to live in a world where everybody did that? Because you might. You might ask yourself, should prostitution be legal? And you'd say, yeah, I'd be fine living in a world where for all rational beings, it's a universal law that prostitution is fine. Or you might be saying, yeah, I'm fine with lying. I'd be fine living in a world where everyone can lie. That can be a universal law for all rational beings. That is not what Kant is saying. He's not asking if you would like it. He's saying, does the idea inherently logically contradict itself? It's not subjective for Kant. It's objective. Here's what I mean. If I were to say, let's use the example of lying. Okay, I'll use two examples. If I were to say to myself, would I like lying to be a universal maxim for all rational beings? Well, it would completely destroy the whole idea of truth-telling. The whole idea of truth-telling, the only way we can communicate information, we have this assumption that somebody is telling us the truth. And if lying is okay and people can do it whenever they want, or let's say I make the rule that's, I can lie as long as it benefits me. And all of a sudden we were to make this some sort of universal rule that anyone can lie as long as it benefits them. Well, the idea of truth-telling goes out the window. The idea, it's not just that we wouldn't like to live in that society. The whole idea of us communicating information based on truth would be contradicted by the idea that people can lie whenever it best benefits them. And so he would say that there's a logical problem with that, and therefore lying is unethical. Or suicide. Let's say we want to take the idea of suicide. Should suicide be ethical or not? Well, if I asked myself, would I want suicide to be a maximum that's capable of becoming a universal law for all rational beings? Basically what I'm saying is, okay, if I say anytime your life is miserable, you can end it. Is that a universal law for all rational beings, or is there a contradiction there? Well, there's a contradiction there. How can you make your life better by not having a life at all? How can you make your life better by ending it? You see, it doesn't make sense. So what Kant's trying to say is not just, would you like to live in this world? He's saying, take the thing you're wrestling with, put it into a proposition, and then ask yourself, would there be some sort of contradiction that would happen if that were to apply universally? Because what most people do with ethics is they just try to argue about their particular thing instead of, you have to answer the umbrella first. You have to ask, what is the general rule? Before you ask, should I lie in this circumstance? You have to ask, what should be the rule on lying generally? Before you ask if this particular sexual act is wrong, you have to ask, what should be a sexual ethic? Before you ask, how should I treat other people? You have to ask, or this particular person, my neighbor that I like or don't like or whatever, you have to ask, how should we generally treat each other? To summarize all of this, Kant thinks that what makes an action right or wrong is whether it follows a universal, rational standard that is applicable to all people, that doesn't contradict itself, that doesn't care about the consequences, where one acts out of the proper motivation of rational duty and treats others as ends. Okay, so how would Kant answer those four scenarios? Well, for Kant, it would be unethical to lie to the Nazis. Doesn't mean we wouldn't. He would just be saying you've done something wrong in so doing. Well, Zach, what if I lie to the Nazis and I save the Jews? What if I say, no, there's no Jews here. I saw them headed towards Paris, 20 minutes ago, head that direction. You might save the Jews there, but Kant will also point out you never know the consequences of your unethical action. What if Nazis then drive to Paris and find a lot more Jews accidentally and kill a lot more? Anyway, he would say, we're not saying you couldn't do something else. Maybe you could fight the Nazis, maybe you could do whatever, but Kant would say, by lying, you have done something immoral. When it comes to the Navy SEAL thing, he would say, you do not get to kill the boy, because that would inherently be wrong. To say, would we like to make it a rule to say that we can kill an innocent person who has not done anything in trying to attack us or illegal within, this circumstance or whatever? No, that would break the entire idea of the difference between righteous and unrighteous killing. There would be a logical contradiction there. So he would say you may not kill the shepherd boy in the lone survivor scenario. He would also say you may not murder one person to save the lives of 50. He'd also probably point out that the sadistic killer was killing the 50, not you, and you're not called to stop them from killing the 50 if the only way to do so is for you to do something that is unethical. And then there are Kantians. There are people that hold to deontological ethics that disagree, actually, on the nuclear bomb issue. And so I don't know exactly how Kant would answer there, but he would probably be against it because it allows the killing of innocent civilians for this practical purpose, and he doesn't care about the consequence. He would want us to ask, would we want to create a categorical imperative that allowed people to kill innocent civilians as long as they could hit their bad target? So that's probably what they should do. Now, there are problems with the deontological system, of course. What happens if you're stuck between two categorical imperatives that contradict each other? Maybe a categorical imperative is don't hand over Jews to the Nazis to be killed, and also don't lie. What do you do then? Or how narrowly should you define the categorical imperatives? What if I say anyone named Zach, who's the author of this podcast, can lie, but nobody else? Or, one may lie if the lie will protect the lives of innocent people from an authority who has no right to murder innocent civilians. What if I pitched the law that way? Then could I lie to the Nazis in the saving the Jews example? And surely consequences should play some role in ethics, right? Maybe not the primary role. Is Kant right to say that we don't care about the consequences at all? Or is that too strong? Well, that's our boy Emmanuel. Let's talk about another system. This is the opposite, utilitarianism. The big players here are Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. We've got a whole lecture on John Stuart Mill's On Liberty. That's a different topic than this. That's his view of what freedom you should have politically in a society. Utilitarianism, again, is trying to create a system that doesn't depend on revealed religion to give us an objective ethical standard. Whereas Kant's was the categorical imperative. What Bentham and Mill are trying to do is they're trying to come up with a view that is based on utility. What do I mean by that? Here's what I mean. I mean, an action is ethical if it leads to the greatest good for the greatest number of people. But by good, they just mean happiness. Okay? So let me say it this way. Let's pretend that God gave us a computer that knows everything. It's an all-knowing computer. If that computer could know for any action the amount of pleasure it would cause in all the people affected and the amount of pain it would cause in all the people affected, and there's different qualities of pain and pleasure, and there's different quantities of pain and pleasure, and it could do that calculus, and it could do all that math, it would be able to spit out what you should do on any given ethical scenario. Okay? So their standard is, does it produce more overall pleasure than pain? Does it produce more overall happiness versus unhappiness? Notice that they're trying to make it objective. They're saying what makes something good. All they mean by good is pleasure and happiness, and all they mean by bad is pain and unhappiness. So it's a pleasure versus pain calculation, if you want to say it that way. Now, we don't have that computer. There's no way to really calculate it, but that's the idea. They're trying to ground it in something that is not ethereal. When we say something's good or bad, we're making a value judgment. How can we make that objective for everybody, regardless of their worldview? And theirs is pain over pleasure. If I do some act, does it produce more pleasure for more people to a higher degree, or does it produce more pain to more people to a higher degree? And that is how I know whether or not it is ethical. I'll give you an example. Let's say I want to make, I'm asking the questions of whether or not people should do drugs. What I have to ask is, for the drug users, would that produce more overall pleasure for society? Then it would produce pain for society. And that would help me determine whether or not doing drugs was ethical or not ethical. Okay? One of the things that John Stuart Mill will emphasize more so than others is you can't just count for the quantity of pleasure, you have to count for the quality of pleasure. Finishing a PhD dissertation is a different type of pleasure than watching professional wrestling. Drinking a $10,000 bottle of Bordeaux wine is a different pleasure than drinking some sort of cheap beer. So it's not just everybody gets one pleasure point or one pain point for whatever action it is. We also have to take into account the quality of the pleasure or the pain. Now, let's talk about how they would answer the four scenarios. Do you lie? Have you done something unethical, lying to the Nazis to protect the Jews? No. Why? Because they would make the case that it produces more overall pleasure to keep Jews from not getting murdered than it does for the pleasure of the Nazis of killing them. But you're going to see there's a problem there. Okay? What happens if most people in the world become more Nazi-leaning? And more pleasure would actually be derived from killing Jews than not. You see the problem that utilitarianism runs into. They would definitely say kill the shepherd boy because you would save more overall lives. They would definitely, in the third scenario, say you should strangle the woman because you're saving 50 people, and 50 is a higher number than 1. Okay? And then most likely, again, utilitarians disagree on this, but most likely they would also say that you should drop the bombs because more people probably would have been killed by a mainland invasion of Japan than if you drop the nuclear bomb. So notice that their answers are almost the exact opposite of the Kantian, the deontological ethics. It's a very different system. Remember, Kant is forget the consequences, just the action. Theirs is kind of forget the action, just the consequences. More pleasure, more pain, more happiness, less, more pleasure, less pain, more happiness, less unhappiness. You see the problem with the system. One, we can't calculate it. There is no way to calculate the long-term effects. If we're saying, should we legalize prostitution? Would that produce more pain than pleasure? It's very hard to calculate. The decay of society and the pain caused by prostitution, especially to the prostitutes, how do you qualify that with the pleasure caused to the clients? It's a good question. The other one, though, is this. Let's say that there's a society that takes a great amount of pleasure in torturing children. And it's only one kid that's being tortured, and that's a lot of pain for him, but that's only one person, but it gives a lot of pleasure to, let's say, 100 million people. You would then have to say that it's okay to torture the child, possibly. Now, utilitarians have responses to all this, just like Kantians have responses to the stuff earlier. I'm just trying to let you see some of the benefits and then some of the problems. That's utilitarianism. It's a little bit easier to understand. It is good is what is the greatest good or greatest pleasure or greatest happiness for the greatest number of people, and bad is what causes more pain than pleasure. Next one. And this one goes back to our boy Aristotle, is virtue ethics. Whereas the last two systems we talked about are trying to assess individual actions. Virtue ethics isn't so much about individual actions. It's about becoming a certain type of person. It's about human excellence, magnanimity. Sometimes it's called aretaic ethics after the Greek word arete, which means excellence, but it really refers to like human excellence, like the virtue of being a moral person, being what a human is meant to be. Arete is like an eagle is most an eagle when it's soaring and being what an eagle is supposed to be. That makes it a good eagle. Or a tree that's healthy, that's growing, that has fruit and leaves, that's being a good tree. The idea here is, what does it look like to be a good person? But by good there, I mean flourishing. I mean virtuous. I mean being what a human is meant to be. That's kind of the idea for Aristotle. But the summary of their position is different. The other ones focus on individual acts, and then they appeal to an objective standard. The categorical imperative, or pleasure versus pain, happiness versus unhappiness, good versus bad principle, utilitarianism, whatever. In virtue ethics, it's different. In virtue ethics, they're not asking those individual questions as precisely of, should I say a curse word here? Or what is homosexuality good or bad, or something like that. They're trying to focus on being the type of person that is well-balanced and that is seeking human virtue so that when the issue arises, you naturally kind of know what to do. It's very interesting. So I'll give you a little summary. The virtue ethicist chooses to act virtuously over time, which causes them to become a virtuous person who naturally does what is right, who acts from the right motivations, and who maximizes their virtuous human potential. Let me say that again. The virtue ethicist chooses to act virtuously over time, which causes them to become a virtuous person who naturally does what is right, who acts from the right motivations, and who maximizes their virtuous human potential. You can read Eudemian ethics, but the main one on this is Nicomachean ethics. That's kind of Aristotle's big ethical work that people appeal to. We have from Aristotle just a bunch of kind of notes that were put together, and it's all kind of thrown together. It's not like most other authors in history where they're able to write these long treatises that are just one thing and one theme. We kind of have just collections of different works that are almost feel like his notes that were thrown together at some point. So he's a difficult author to read, partially because of that. So anyway, that's the view. The view is, as I practice human excellence and practice virtue, I become more virtuous over time. How do I practice the virtue? I have to do it when I'm bad at it. I have to practice the virtue when I'm not good at it, and I become good at it. Let me give you an example. We think of courage. He uses courage as an example a lot. Courage is a great example. Virtue. That's a combination of courage and virtue. Courage is a virtue for Aristotle and for most people. Most people see courage as a good thing. We see it as a virtue. we think of courage as like taking a shot of liquid courage before hitting on a girl at a bar, or we think of it as like just jumping on a grenade when the moment comes, or rushing off all willy-nilly into battle and getting blown up or something like that. Aristotle doesn't think that. Aristotle thinks that if you want to be courageous, you have to practice being courageous in a bunch of small things, and then you will actually be it. You don't just hope to be courageous and one day wake up courageous. You have to practice overcoming fears over and over and over again in 1,000 small things. And then when you're in battle and the grenade hits the ground, then you'll jump on it. It's the kind of person you've become. Now, this is really interesting. So let me give you an example. Let's say you want to learn how to hit a major league curveball. You want to be a good baseball player. You can't just hope you're going to do that. You can't just psych yourself up and step up there and never have played baseball and hit a major league curveball. It's not going to happen. You're going to strike out tremendously. You also can't just pray before you go to bed, "Dear God, give me baseball skills," and I'll wake up and I'll just have baseball skills. Same thing is true with playing the piano. If you want to be excellent at playing the piano, you can't just psych yourself up and just sit down and do it. You also can't just pray, "God, make me good at practicing the piano," and then you wake up and all of a sudden you're just have piano skills, like it's just been matrix, imported into your mind. You know what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to practice hitting curveballs when you're bad at it, and then you get good at it. You have to do it and practice it over and over and over while you're bad at it, while you're not very good at hitting curveballs, and then you become the person who can hit them. You have to practice the piano while you're bad at it and you suck and everybody's like, "Shut up, this is so annoying." You have to practice that, and then you actually are able to play the piano. So to say it another way, why isn't virtue like that? That's kind of what Aristotle's asking. If you can practice being bad at piano till you're good at it, and you can practice hitting a curveball while you're bad at it till you're good at it, can you not practice being courageous while you're bad at it until you're good at it? Can you not practice having fortitude when you're bad at it till you're good at it? Can you not practice resisting lust when you're bad at it until you're good at it? What if you could practice virtue like a sport? Why do we think that one day we'll wake up and be courageous, or we'll one day wake up and not be anxious, or we'll wake up one day and not be proud, or we'll wake up one day and not be lustful? You have to practice those things. You create almost like an ethical muscle memory every time you do an action. If you continually act in a way that's not virtuous, it becomes easier to be not a virtuous person. If you continuously act in a way that's virtuous, you become more of a virtuous person. And so Aristotle is going to talk about practicing what you want to become. There's a lot of wisdom there. I might do a whole lesson just on that because I think that's fascinating. Another thing Aristotle emphasized in his system of becoming this excellent person is that not on all issues, but in a lot of issues, you are trying to hit what he calls the golden mean, or what is called the golden mean. It's a phrase that's usually used to clarify. He's not speaking English, by the way, so that's dumb for me to say it that way. It's a phrase that scholars use to talk about this idea in Aristotle of a lot of times a virtue stands between two vices. I'll give you an example. On the one hand, courage is not cowardice. That's obvious. But on the other hand, it's not brashness. If you just run out in the middle of battle to get killed, that's suicide. That's not courage, right? No, you have to have the right amount of knowing what to do to be courageous. You can't just run out there and commit suicide, but nor can you be cowardly. You have to have the right medium. You have to know where that middle point is to say, okay, true courage here is me doing this thing I'm scared of, even though it's dangerous, but I'm not just committing suicide. I'm not being stupid. I've thought through it. So there are times to retreat out of cowardice, and there are times to retreat out of being smart, right? Wittiness is another one that's in between two extremes. On the one hand, you can be the absolute clown, the absolute fool that nobody takes seriously, that can only make the joke that everybody thinks is ridiculous. That's not good. But you also don't want to be the boorish person that's boring. If you're somebody that can't take a joke, I've met so many people that have the vice, as Aristotle would say, of boorishness. If you're not witty, Aristotle thinks you're not ethical when it comes to that category. Okay? Wittiness, making the joke when you should, being serious when you should, being witty and using the pun and doing that kind of thing when you should, that is the virtue. So a lot of times these are in between two extremes. Now, it's not the case in every category. It's not like, how many times should I cheat on my wife? And then there's like a spectrum, and you're like, he's not saying cheat on her sometime or something like that. That's not the point. But on most of these issues, he's trying to point to, usually there's a balance of what you're trying to do with the right time and the right kind of person you've become, etc. Now, how would they answer the four scenarios? This is where it gets tricky. Let me give you the biggest problem with virtue ethics. It's not precise enough to answer some of our very specific questions. If you're asking the question, is homosexuality ethical or unethical? Well, in a Greco-Roman world, Aristotle would probably be fine with certain forms of homosexuality, but others that are virtue ethicists, like medievals that follow him, think, no, that's not right. So how do you answer the individual question? So, okay, I need to be a virtuous person, practice these virtues, and then I'll know what to do when the time comes. Well, virtue ethicists disagree. Also, how can I practice these things to become a virtuous person until I know what those virtues are? We know some. We know wittiness is better than being a clown, and we know that courage is better than foolishness. But what about things like, these very who you should vote for? What about things like discipline of children? What about things like certain sexual ethics? What about things like certain things in bioethics? The virtue ethicist doesn't give us enough clarity as new issues arise of what we should do. So it's a big problem for virtue ethics. Now, there are other ethical systems. You can have sentimentality. That what you do, what we really mean by ethics is when you see somebody who's hurting, you imagine what that would be like for you, and you have compassion for that person. That's kind of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. There are other ethical systems, who we have a whole lesson on, by the way. There are other ethical systems that should say just do what's best for you, just like this severe type of egoism where it's just straight up, do whatever's best for you, forget everybody else. So there's other ethical systems, but those are the big ones. Okay, I hope that's a helpful summary for you. I want to ask two more questions, and then we'll be done. One, are moral acts selfish? What some philosophers have pointed out is that all moral acts are actually selfish to some degree, because when somebody does them, they're doing so that they get something good out of it. When I help a little old lady across the street, yeah, she might give me some money, but even if she doesn't, I feel good about myself. That's a benefit to me. I can maybe post it on social media and others think well of me. I think that's kind of douchey, but others think well of me. That's a benefit to me. In fact, every ethical thing that I think that I do, I'm doing because it benefits me. I like the kind of person I become. I feel good about myself. I feel good about doing this act. There's supposedly, and I don't know if this is a true story or not, supposedly, somebody can look it up. There's a story of Abraham Lincoln stopping his carriage to help a mother pig whose little piglets are kind of stuck in the mud. And somebody thinks that he's doing so because he's just being nice to the pigs. And he's like, no, I wouldn't have been able to live with myself all day. My conscience would have bugged me all day. And the whole point of that story is to say, he kind of did it for him. Why do you want to follow God? So that you can be saved, be resurrected, go to heaven, whatever it is? That's a big benefit to you. Even the martyr does so because they benefit more by being martyred. So are all these acts selfish? Well, it depends on what you mean. If you mean, do you benefit from ethical acts? Sure, but I would ask this, is that wrong? Is that bad? Shouldn't you benefit by living virtuously? Wouldn't that be what we expect? Wouldn't we expect that when you do something good, that does make something better for you? Like, wouldn't there be an incentive, which is good? So there's a philosopher and theologian named Joseph Butler, and one of the things that he will point out, which I think is helpful, is this. There is a difference between doing an act just so you get something out of it. So like if I was just nice to my grandmother so I could get in her will and take all her money. That's different than if I'm actually helping somebody and it's the right thing to do and I also happen to benefit. So those are different. Last question to ask in ethics. Last question to ask. We've solved all of ethics. Last question that we're going to talk about today is, can you be happy without virtue? Let me tell you why this is profound. So pause for a second if you didn't understand what I just said. Everyone thinks that they'll be happy if I just have a bunch of money and a bunch of women and a bunch of power and everybody knows my name and I'm a rock star and whatever. And yet a lot of those people have terrible lives and hate themselves and commit suicide or do whatever. Hedge fund managers that are billionaires kill themselves to tremendously high degrees. What if one of the things you need to be happy is virtue? I'll tell you what made me think about this. I have a buddy, and he used to be involved in a gang. He actually used to be involved in a cartel, and he's moved away from that. That was in another country, and he's been clean and a legal citizen and all this kind of stuff for, a bunch of years, decades. And one of the things he said that was interesting to me is he said, mob bosses, cartel lords, these kind of crime syndicate bosses, he said they have all the money. It's so much money. They have all the power. They can have somebody killed by a wink of their eye. They have all the beautiful women. They have they have the mansions, they have the guns, they have all the things, and they are absolutely miserable because they're not virtuous. They hate themselves at the end of the day, and you cannot put a price on living with yourself. I would say that somebody that's like a pedophile is probably really miserable because they really probably hate themselves. They're doing what they think brings them pleasure, but actually they have a lot of pain because they know what they're doing is evil, and so they can't be happy. So maybe something to ask yourself as you're pursuing trying to be happy, because everybody's trying to be happy, is virtue necessary to be happy? I think that's a great question. Anyway, ethics, boring, who cares? Just kidding. It's an interesting topic. Ethics hits us differently than other philosophical topics because it's practical and it's emotional and it affects us in a different way. So if we're debating a metaphysical topic of like realism versus idealism or something like this, how many substances are there? That's interesting, but people don't usually punch each other over that. I'm sure people have. But when we're talking about torturing in war, we're talking about abortion, we're talking about sexual ethics, we're talking about these kind of things, people get really fired up because ethics hits us in a way that's different than other philosophical topics because it deals with some of these. This is why I think that when you just say there's no such thing as ethics, that could be true. It just does not at all hit with the human experience. There's something in us that thinks these issues are more important than other things. So there's ethics. I hope it's helpful for you. This is a super truncated, we could talk about ethics. You could have a whole podcast that just talks about different ethical issues. I hope that this is giving you some clarity. Appreciate you tuning in to Ideological, and we'll see you next time.